Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine and I'm joined now by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Oh, thanks. I'm very excited, thanks for asking, because you and I today are joined by the wonderful, the magnificent Ali Maxwell. Hi, Ali.
Hello, guys. Not as excited as I am. It's always an absolute pleasure to join you.
How are you today?
Yeah, I'm really well. I've already recorded a Going Up, Going Down podcast for The Athletic this morning, and it's only just turned 10 a.m. So, I mean, I've been up for hours, which is unusual at this time, but I'm always excited to talk EFL football.
You are a plug machine, aren't you? Consistently, you're always ready. I think, no, listen, it's a very admirable quality. I think it's fantastic. You don't often get very long to talk, and then you gotta get it in there. But it's an excellent podcast, Going Up, Going Down.
The things they don't tell you when you go freelance is that, you know which way your bread is buttered, and you've got to get good at plugging stuff. That's fine by me.
Yeah. Anyway, listen, we're going to talk about EFL today. Ali has kindly provided a list for us of players that he thinks are interesting to pay attention to in the near future. We didn't want anyone to feel particularly left out, so we're changing the way that we are, the format of this episode slightly. We're going to talk about it from a player perspective rather than a team perspective, and that's all very exciting, isn't it? But before we get started, let me remind you that if you would like to, you can subscribe to The Athletic and currently get 40% off by visiting theathletic.com/Tifo transfers. That's theathletic.com/Tifo transfers for all of the most cool reading available about sport and football, other things. Good advert. Insert good advert here. Please go and do that. Anyway, for now, I will leave you in the cool hands and the warm embrace of Ali Maxwell. Okay, Ali Maxwell, I would like to start by talking about Ebereche Eze, because obviously he's moved from QPR to Crystal Palace. Tell me these things. What's he like on the ball? What kind of contribution will he provide? What kind of player is he? Go.
In order, absolutely magnificent. Hopefully a large contribution, and I've already forgotten the third question. But no, I honestly could talk about Eze all day, because I have a huge appetite for covering the EFL. I like all of the three divisions. I like pretty much everything about the EFL apart from the pretty horrendous governance thereof and all of the off-field issues. But that all sort of fades away when you watch certain players and when you can watch players develop, which in the EFL is something that happens a lot. And Eze is someone who we've watched develop over the last 3 seasons. He burst onto the scene, a loan spell with Wycombe. You have to remember with Eze that he had been released by a number of different London clubs, probably most notably Millwall at the age of 16, 17, 18, and hadn't really found a home. So QPR have picked him up. They've got a great youth system and they work really hard to develop players, and they will take on players released by Premier League clubs in the London area. And he went on loan to Wycombe without anyone really knowing much about him, knowing how to pronounce his name. Everyone was very excited about the potential for puns with him being called Easy, but sadly that's not how you pronounce it. He went to Wycombe, and within his first month, he scored 1 goal from 25 yards with his right foot, 1 goal from 25 yards with his left foot, and we started to sit up and take notice. QPR realised what they had then, I think, and the way that he's developed over the last 18 months has been just one of our sort of favourite parts of covering the EFL. He is a ball carrier extraordinaire. For me, the best dribbler in the division this season. There are other players maybe with lower centres of gravity and maybe even other players with greater sort of flicks and tricks. Said Benrahma springs to mind there. But I think in terms of efficiency and dribbling ability, Eze has to be the hardest player to tackle. And partly because he's doing it in not always in central areas. He does like to drift out to the left. That's where he often receives the ball, trying to find pockets of space in that left half space or even out on the left flank. But because he's dribbling ultimately through the heart of the pitch rather than down the touchline, I think his dribbling is perhaps better than other players whose stats or data might show them to complete more dribbles. I would say quite Grealish-esque in the way that he carries the ball, and also in the way that because of that elite skill that he has, the way that he demands that opposition teams, double team or just send extra attention to him when he's on the ball. It's such a valuable skill for a player to have, and it's why, and it's one that I think will translate into the Premier League. He's got great upper body strength and agility. It's very hard to knock him off the ball. And I think what's quite nice about him as well, dare I say it, quite an old school thing, something that will please, proper football men, is that he really does stay on his feet. He's the type of player that gets kicked a lot, gets fouled a lot, but he doesn't try and buy free kicks as much as some other players. He really does try and continue with his run, and I think that's quite admirable as well. So first and foremost, I would say watching Eze play is a treat whenever he's on the ball because of his ability to carry it. But he's developed the other side of his game as well. Production in the final third, whether it's picking the right pass and executing good through balls. He had a good partnership with Naki Wells at the start of last season. Sometimes it feels like he holds on to the ball a little too long, and maybe you'd want him to move the ball a little bit quicker. But I just can't wait to see how he takes to Premier League football, and I'm pretty sure that a large part of his skill set will translate very well indeed.
See, I had all sorts of questions for you there, Ali, and then one by one you just answered them. So I've had to scramble to continue the conversation.
Can I jump in then? Just a personal question here, Ali, because you're an EFL expert. That's what it says underneath your name on your website, alimaxwell.com.
And on my gravestone, hopefully.
And on your gravestone. But you said that I was really intrigued there to hear you say that you're very excited to see how he's going to perform in the Premier League. At the weekends, do you have to presumably prioritise watching, as and when available, EFL games or visiting games or watching Championship games on television instead of Premier League games? Do you find yourself... presumably those clash fairly often.
Yeah, that is a personal question. Thanks, Joe. I'll give a little insight into my weekend. Why not? I almost every Saturday work on the EFL Highlights show, where I am at times a producer, at times a pundit, and often both in the same day. And that's been the case for me for about 5 years. So very much so on a Saturday, I am watching the Championship matches. Those are the ones that we in the production office get sort of beamed in. So you'll have a grid of about 10 games going on at one time, which is very exciting. Yeah, we will, of course, have Gillette Soccer Saturday on as well, so that we're abreast of all the other goings on in League One and League Two. And of course, through osmosis there, you do get the Premier League results as they come in. As you can imagine, in any sort of production team, there are fans of Premier League clubs. So it's not like we completely switch off from that, but it's definitely fair to say that my focus is on the Championship. And it is not unusual for me to not know all of the Premier League scores by the time I get home on a Saturday night, but that is often rectified on Sunday, where I catch up with Match of the Day and watch as many Super Sunday games as possible. So it's just a lot of football all of the time, basically.
What's the green room like on the EFL Highlight Show?
I'm not sure there is a green room. We basically go production office to dressing room. If you're a pundit, you get your own dressing room, which is always quite exciting. So I suppose
does it have your name on the door of the dressing room?
No,
Ali Maxwell, George Elick.
Dressing room 3 is what I call it. But everyone knows it's mine. Everyone knows not to go in there. No, normally because it's the same building that they film a lot of it's where Premier League productions are based. And so you will often rub shoulders with
it's in Stockley Park.
Yeah, that's right, and all the refs as well doing VAR. It's an absolute hub of activity. You'll often go to the toilet at half time, but everyone's going to the toilet at that time because it's half time. And sometimes you'll open the door to the toilet, and there Mike Dean or someone will be staring back at you in flesh. It's
horrifying.
It can be quite disconcerting. And then you'll go downstairs and get ready for the show, and there you'll have Tony Adams or Ryan Giggs or someone like that. It's a hell of a place, I must say.
Ali, can we talk about Jude Bellingham?
Yes.
Because when he left for Borussia Dortmund, the news cycle was kind of seized by the decision to retire his shirt number, which for a young player, I felt like he was subjected to some fairly unfair lols from the Twitter community. Can you just describe what kind of player he is? Because he's one of the most exciting footballers I've seen at his age for a really, really long time. And it feels as if a lot of people haven't actually had the opportunity to see him. Obviously, Birmingham didn't spend a lot of time on television last season. And when he moves over to the Bundesliga, he'll kind of disappear into a little bit of a vacuum. Can you just walk us through the kind of progression of his career to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a guy who every single big club has known about for years and years. And one of the many things that stands him apart from the rest is that instead of joining one of the bigger club academies, he, and I think advised by his dad, who's a very well-known non-league goal scorer in the Midlands area, and I think a policeman or something of that ilk, he was adamant that Jude Bellingham, because they were big fans of Birmingham City, would be looked after by the Birmingham City Academy and would play his first senior football matches for Birmingham. So they managed to avoid the advances of, your Manchester Cities and your Manchester Uniteds, who offer such attractive deals for, I was going to say 13-year-olds, but it goes lower, doesn't it? Basically young talent of any age. It's a pretty strange world, academy football and those young age groups. So I guess that's a little bit of background on him. Birmingham fans were kind of waiting for him to be thrust into the spotlight, knowing that they had a gem on their hands. And it was Pep Clotet, their manager this season, who just decided, I'm going to give him about as many minutes as I physically can. Arguably, it was a bit concerning at times how much he was playing, given his young age at just 16. In terms of what sort of player he is at the moment, I think one of the most exciting things is that you just know that Bellingham in 5 years' time is going to look a bit different on the pitch to how he looks now. They played a 4-4-2 Birmingham, and he got minutes across the midfield, mostly on the left side. He's right-footed, so tucked in a little bit in a left midfield position. He would move into central areas and try and impact the game from there. I think that he could be anything, to be honest. That's what keeps getting said about him, because even his development between now and the age of 21 is 4 years worth at Dortmund, where really he could end up being any kind of midfield player, possibly a wide player, or maybe even further forward. What I would say is that the standout skill at the moment, a bit like Eze, is ball carrying for me. Certainly with the ball at his feet, that's what stands out. He's got wonderful balance, ability to change direction, send defenders the wrong way with sort of subtle movements, and he's a very skillful player. His passing is tidy. I would say it doesn't stand out at the moment for its creativity. Another thing that does stand out is his appetite for the defensive side of the game, which probably isn't what people might think just having read things on Twitter about him and watched compilations. His absolute tenacity to win the ball back and the extent to which he stood up to the physical rigours of the Championship at the age of 16 is, unbelievably notable and impressive. He did score a few goals. Mostly, he showed a good ability to sort of make the right runs into the box, time the runs well, and to finish loose balls or cutbacks in the area. His long-range shooting, I must admit, I haven't been too impressed with. His technique when shooting, he often scuffs the ball when shooting from range. This is an unbelievably, this is applying about as harsh a critical eye as you can to someone who is so young. Most people in his age group won't have even been seen at senior level. So I'm just trying to give a flavour of what I've seen. Really good ball carrier. Seems to just have something mentally. Seems to read the game really well for someone his age. And this absolute desire to improve, an appetite for the defensive side of the game, and this quality on the ball that will improve over time. But hence why I think people just still think of him as a bit of a blank canvas for Dortmund to work with, and what a team to move if you want to develop as a young footballer.
Have you spent any time with him in mixed zones? And I just want to kind of get a sense for what sort of person he is.
I have to admit I haven't. I haven't spent any time with him. I can't really speak to his character other than to say that, understandably, given that he was the darling of Birmingham City, and given the maturity that he and his team that are managing him have shown in their decision-making in his short career so far, you hear nothing but good things about the way that he is, how driven he is, and basically how sort of single-minded he is about becoming the best possible footballer that he can be. But, it's always worth reminding yourself that he's 17 now, but he was 16 for large parts of the season. And, I remember what I was like at 16. I didn't show any of those traits. So, from a personality perspective, only good reviews so far.
Hey, can we chat generally about the finances in the division? Because I think we've seen so far this season, as far as we can see, the biggest incoming deal is Jordan Hugill's £3 million move from West Ham to Norwich, who of course just been relegated, so have the benefit of the parachute payments. A year ago, we saw very different numbers: £12 million, £10 million. That's quite different, isn't it? Are the clubs feeling the pinch? Is there much discussion about COVID's impact on the market at that level? Or can you just give us a brief overview of how you feel that's being impacted at the moment?
Yeah, I would just sum it up by saying that uncertainty just governs everything at the moment, especially when it comes to football finance. League One and League Two clubs are in a really tough position because for them, it's a higher proportion of their income comes from the match day itself, ticket sales, and obviously concessions and food and drink, and the match day itself. In the Championship, TV revenue is a little bit higher, certainly much higher for those who get given money by the Premier League in the form of parachute payments. So, we have seen some fees spent, but I would just say that at the moment, it's just so uncertain that things aren't really getting done. It seems like the season is getting closer and closer. I think we're about 3 weeks away, but it's worth remembering that they've changed the transfer window, so it will go on until mid-October. I expect it to be a very strange first month of the season, where there will still be a lot of teams who are doing a lot of business and the majority of their transfer business with the season already underway. So it might benefit some teams who have a settled squad. There are a few clubs like Preston and Blackburn, Bristol City, who pretty much already have their squad as it will be. So maybe that will help clubs early on in the season. In terms of just transfer fees and not seeing the big ones, those are generally clubs with parachute payments who have come down from the Premier League that spend 10-15 million pounds on individual players. It's rare for a club not in receipt of parachute payments to spend that kind of money, even though we have seen Birmingham signing Sunjic last season for maybe 8 or 9 mil. Reading signed Puskás for quite a lot of money, but it is quite
Fulham.
rare. So,
what about Fulham?
Well, they came down from the Premier League. They had the parachute payment money, and that's what they
really. Oh, okay. Sorry, within the 3 years since they were relegated.
No. Fulham were relegated from the Premier League in 18-19, and last summer.
It just feels like 3 years
they
ago,
weren't.
Joe.
Really?
Yeah.
So there you go.
God.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought that was so much longer ago.
So what I would say, Joe, is I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that 3 million biggest transfer fee. That won't last till mid-October. But it's just the fact that Bournemouth and Watford and Norwich, they haven't sold any of their players yet, and that's going to play a big part. You can make a starting 11 of Norwich, Bournemouth and Watford players combined that wouldn't look out of place in Premier League mid-table, and who are all reported to be moving at some point for quite a lot of money. But it just hasn't happened yet because of all this uncertainty. So when those clubs, it's not out of the question that Norwich, Bournemouth and Watford could raise another 80 million quid, certainly more than 50 in player sales, at which point they might have a bit more to work with.
Ali, what's the retention rate been like? I mean, did some of the clubs try and trim their squad size to reduce the wage bill over the summer?
Not hugely in the Championship. In League One and League Two, because contracts are shorter, it kind of suits clubs and players at that level to sign 1 or 2 year contracts, or at least it did suit players before this global pandemic. And now we've got a very troubling situation in League One and League Two, where there's just a huge pool of players out of contract trying to get the same sort of deals that they were on previously, and the clubs aren't offering them. So I do predict in League One and League Two that come the start of October, it's going to flip around, and suddenly there's going to be a lot of players who realise that on quite basic terms, they just need employment for the next 9 months, and will have to reduce their demands, and the demands, dare I say it, of their agents as well. In the Championship, it hasn't quite been as much. I mean, the Championship TV deal is about £8 million, I think. League One, it's about $1 million and a bit less in League Two. So they do have more income, Championship clubs, just being given to them as part of that TV deal. For the most part, there hasn't been a huge amount of trimming, if you will. Players who are out of contract, a lot more left than you would ordinarily have expected. So I think there was a bit of like, okay, well, we do need to trim a little bit, so we'll just let the guys out of contract go. But generally, a lot of teams are just kind of staying where they are and sticking with a similar squad to last season, and will maybe look to add 1 or 2 in the next 6 weeks or so. But it does make you wonder. It kind of the there's a group of teams who just missed out on promotion or just missed out on the playoffs, and normally you try and pick out one or two of those to sort of make the leap and make a big step forward and start challenging at the top end of the division. And as we are currently with 3 weeks to go, it's quite difficult to pick one out of those teams because for the most part it's the same squads and the same managers, and therefore it's difficult to predict a huge rise in performance.
Right, this one's not strictly transfer related, but I would like to ask you about Kalvin Phillips because he's been called up to the England squad, of course, without ever making a Premier League appearance. And I would like to ask you how good a player he is, because as Seb's written here in his notes for me, he's heard him described as England's best six, which seems ... bold ... but happy to be corrected. Could you correct or not correct Seb for me, please, Ali Maxwell of Going Up, Going Down podcast?
Is he a 4? Is he a 6? It all comes down to squad number semantics, as it so often does. It really does. No, I'm slightly dodging the question there because off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of who else would be in that conversation. I think that's probably quite important. I wonder if your Declan Rice's and your Harry Winks's, is Jordan Henderson a 6? I don't know. I mean, he's just captained a team to Premier League success, so I dare say he might probably lay claim to being better than Kalvin Phillips. But it's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, one of the big things for clubs all across football is in recruitment, when you're looking at players who play in different divisions to yourself, is what's called benchmarking and working out how their performances in one division could or would translate to the division that you are in. So this is going to be quite interesting, and is always interesting with top-level championship players. How will they translate to the Premier League? In the last few years, there have been a lot of young players, especially signed from the Championship to the Premier League. What I've noticed is generally they don't necessarily hit the ground and just absolutely start smashing it in the Premier League straight away, because I do think there's a big step up. We see that with the teams that are they are the Championship champions, Norwich City, for example, and then they get relegated with 20-odd points the next season. So it's a big step up. What I would say about Phillips is that physically and technically, he was clearly like a cut above the Championship. Kind of a bit like when your older brother joins in with your football match with your mates and just dominates everything. It's worth pointing out when you talk about Kalvin Phillips, just the unbelievable impact that Marcelo Bielsa has had on his career. You could say that about a number of Leeds players. Bielsa took over a squad of players that was not considered that impressive in Championship terms. And many of them you will see in the Premier League next season, the likes of Stewart Dallas, who plays about 8 different positions under Bielsa, Luke Ayling, who had spent a large part of his career as a League One right back, and I'm pretty sure will be galloping forward in the Premier League for Leeds next season. Bielsa likes to stick with those he knows generally. Phillips, before Bielsa arrived, had got a fair amount of game time because he was always considered to be quite talented, but hadn't necessarily translated into making a particular impact on games in the Championship. And I'm not sure that it was necessarily considered that he was a number 6 at all until Bielsa arrived. Needed someone to play quite a specific role where your defensive responsibilities are pretty immense, but you're also, he's also a quarterback, to use that term as well, and leaned on for a range of passing and a patience on the ball and a knowledge of basically the sort of first point of every attack almost. So it's a really important role in Leeds' team, and no one would have picked Kalvin Phillips to have had the last few years that he'd had. So you have to give Bielsa a lot of credit, and then the player as well for adapting to the rigorous physical demands of playing for Marcelo Bielsa, clearly just soaking in so much of the coaching ability that Bielsa has. And now, I think he will very much impress people when he plays in the Premier League. I'm surprised that he was called up to the England squad having not played a Premier League game, because I was under the impression that was a bit of a sticking point for Southgate, certainly something that he had mentioned in passing when talking about Jack Grealish after he'd had such a good year in the Championship. So I'm really excited to see how he does. Clearly the step up to the Premier League means that he will be tested a lot more, and there have been a couple of times where he's wavered. When you play such a high line at times, and when you play quite a risky passing style, there have been 1 or 2 times where he's given the ball away in dangerous areas. He was sent off in a game against QPR. It was just a really petulant red card to pick up, and that was disappointing for someone who was considered to be a leader of this team in a time where Leeds really did need him. But generally, can't really say much more positive stuff about him, because for the last 2 years he's just dictated things in a team that we've admired very much in the Championship. So yeah, I can't really speak much more highly of him.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Leeds in the Premier League. I think it's going to be fascinating, potentially even opening night against Liverpool as well, which would be, I don't know if they've released the TV fixtures yet, but
well, if you remember
cool.
Liverpool Norwich, which was the first game of the Premier League season,
I do,
on that Friday night when there was that rather nice. A lot of love for the bravery, which is often the other side of the naivety coin. I always think if you think that the pundits were impressed by the way that Norwich approached that game, just wait until Leeds roll into town.
That's true. I remember watching that game and being surprised at some of the punditry around it. Also feeling like very promising for Norwich ahead of the season, thinking that they handled Liverpool pretty well, actually. Liverpool are just a fantastic team, and in that, I think it was the first half that they conceded all those goals. Pukki finally got one, and then they went on to have a couple of good results before being awful for the rest of the year and making you and me look like a fool, Ali Maxwell, because you'll remember that you were here last year and you said that they'd be the best team of the promoted.
I do
and
not
that Sheffield United would be the worst.
I think it's worth pointing out at this juncture, far be it to compare Norwich and Leeds too closely. And Norwich, despite winning the Championship, I think conceded something like 60 goals that season, which is an unusually high number for a team going up. And they never sorted out those defensive issues, did they? Whereas Leeds, their defensive numbers have been magnificent for 2 years, so they are going up a much more solid unit. That's for sure.
Very exciting. Okay, listen, when we come back, we're going to hear about Ali's team. Ali's picked a team, and we're going to hear about it. Okay, time to hear about Ali's team. Seb, take us away. You're going to lead us, or lead Ali, through Ali's team. It's all very complicated, but it will make sense when people start hearing what's happening.
Yeah, I'm more just going to get out of Ali's way and let him list his team. Although the first name on the list is an interesting one because it was the first Championship game I saw last season, and this player dropped an almighty bollock in that game. Ali, who's your goalkeeper?
So this goalkeeper is Simon Sluga of Luton Town. I think that the way that I understood my remit here was potentially looking at sensible transfers and trying to take a step back and trying to work out what's the period before one becomes a sensible transfer on the Tifo pod. Maybe what I just call an interesting player, and it doesn't necessarily mean interesting because they are going to be the best player in the league. But I just always interested in player development, and here are some guys that I think could be ones to watch in the Championship this season. Not necessarily, as I say, the best players in their position, but just guys who you might not have heard much about and might hear more about over the next 9 months. So Sluga, I just find him a fascinating case study because he was not one of the best goalkeepers in the Championship over the course of last season. There were probably a top tier of three. Bartosz Białkowski of Millwall, Brice Samba of Nottingham Forest, and Rafael Cabral at Reading all had excellent seasons. You also had Dylan Phillips of Charlton and Marek Rodak of Fulham, who had objectively excellent seasons. And you can't say the same for Sluga because, as Sev said, he started the season so badly. It sometimes feels in the Championship like it's a league with quite bad goalkeepers. There's basically, it's almost unheard of, I think, for a goalkeeper to go through a whole season without at least one real howler. Last season we had George Long in goal for Hull, Lee Camp at Birmingham, Jack Butland as well, of course, at Stoke, who seemed to be having clangers every sort of 3 or 4 games. And Sluga very much started in that vein. He was Luton's record transfer, and it was such an unusual signing for them to make. It was their first. I think they'd only made one other signing from outside of the UK and Ireland in like a decade previously. They won promotion from League One. It was back-to-back promotions all the way from League Two to the Championship. And then they dropped like £1 million, maybe £2 million on this goalkeeper. Turns out they'd played against him in a friendly in Slovenia a year or so before, where he was playing for Rijeka, is what I'm calling them. And they just sort of kept tabs on him and then pulled the trigger. But I think it's unusual for any club's record signing to be a goalkeeper. But that's what it was. So, of course, he started so badly. He made an error against Middlesbrough in the opening game. And then for a few months, he would routinely throw the ball to the opposition. He would let shots squirm under him. He once let a pass back from a defender roll under his foot for an own goal. It's that sort of thing. It was real embarrassing stuff. So he got dropped. He missed, I think, 11 games. And he came back in with 20 games to go because it turned out their other goalkeepers weren't great either. And he just had a magnificent 20 games to finish the season. So it was almost like he was so eager to impress. I think there's, with goalkeepers, maybe even more so than outfield players, the psychological aspect is so important. And coming in from abroad, a new division, different types of things you have to cope with as a goalkeeper, potentially more crosses, and he struggled to adapt and then basically just found his form. So it's someone that, based on that last 20 games of the season, I'm hoping, playing for a team in Luton who are much better defensively under Nathan Jones as they were under Graham Jones, who they started last season with. I think Sluga might have the platform to thrive. And, he came with good pedigree. He's had international experience. And, I just think it's interesting to me that after a few months of him signing, everyone had written him off as a terrible record signing. What a shocking transfer that was. And I dare say, come the end of this season, they might sell him for a profit.
Yeah, before we go into your back four, you mentioned Jack Butland in that, and every time I hear his name now, I just feel sad. What's happened to his career?
I don't know, to be honest with you. The vibe at Stoke City has been so bad for so many years now, not just since they got relegated, but I think for a year or two beforehand, and he has really suffered from that. I think there's an extent to which you let players off for poor performances when they just play for a poor team with a poor atmosphere and a succession of managers that can't turn things around. But it got to a point with Butland last season where you just couldn't ignore how poor he was, and in comparison to what he'd been before, of course, that it's just always so stark when you've seen someone who was battling for England's #1 jersey and who literally just lost games for Stoke at the start of last season. I think they had 8 points after 15 games, and it's brutal to say, and I try not to criticise players where possible, but a number of those games were tight games on the balance of play that just involved Butland giving the opposition a goal or two and turning wins into draws or draws into losses. So it's hopeful that if he is trusted with the gloves this season under Michael O'Neill, that the atmosphere has improved a lot, and Stoke are expected to be maybe not a challenger for the title, but potentially a playoff challenger. And I dare say if things are a bit calmer at the club and if the foundations are a bit better, then Butland might be able to have a sort of Sluga-like recovery.
Okay, more positive things. Let's go into your back four, but let's also start with a player that's popped up in our Sensible Transfers series. Swansea's Joe Rodon.
Yeah, he's one of my centre-backs here. I think if it weren't for a really annoying ankle injury that he's had that kept him out for large parts of last season, Rodon would quite possibly have left for the Premier League already in the sort of Chris Mepham, Adam Webster vibe of... you get games in the Championship as a centre-back, and you really... Premier League clubs only seem to need about one season's worth of data and video and scouting until they decide, we want to give this guy a go. And clearly, as we've seen with the transfer fees involved with Webster and Mepham, they're willing to pay quite a lot for British centre-backs. So I think he possibly would have left for the Premier League already. Actually, in this 11, he's maybe the most likely to leave this summer anyway, but I think there's a thought that because of the injuries, that people might be a little wary of pulling the trigger on him just yet. A really exciting prospect for Wales as well. This is a guy that, alongside Mepham and Ampadu, depending on where he finishes up in terms of his sort of natural position, could be at the heart of Wales's defence for years to come. First and foremost, what stands out about Rodon is he's a bit of a throwback. It's probably a term that gets used too much when talking about centre-backs, but he feels like a bit of a throwback just in his appetite for aggressive defending, a ball winner both in the air and on the deck. He absolutely relishes the physical side of the game, and in the Championship, you've got teams that you come up against who do play a very direct style, as well as other teams who play really interesting possession-based styles. So you do get a bit of everything as a centre back. You have to deal with, the movement of someone like Bamford or Charlie Austin or Watkins one week, and then you have to come up against more of a battering ram in Lucas Djukovic or Kiefer Moore or Matt Smith. So it's you get a real sort of education as a young centre-back, and he's shown himself up to the challenge, certainly as a pure defender. But then I think also, and it's partly down to the team that he plays for, he's got a lot to thank the sort of decision makers at Swansea who are so intent on playing a possession-based style and have been for a few years now, under Graham Potter, of course, and now under Steve Cooper. And that means that his passing numbers always do stand out. You know, he's got the remit to play risky, if you like, but essentially progressive passes, to spread the ball out wide where possible, to step in into midfield with the ball at his feet as well. And that's going to help a young defender develop those skills, which are so highly sought after at the top level. And yeah, you know, when he's been fit and available, he's been a huge player for Swansea. He feels like a leader, even though he's only about 22 years old, and just a really confident player that I like a lot.
Okay, now who are we putting around him in this back four?
So I'm going to pair him, because Rodon's right-footed, I'm going to pair him with a lefty centre-back. As we know, they are all the rage at the moment. He's called Tom McIntyre, and he plays for Reading. He just started to make his way into the starting 11 post-COVID in that sort of 10-game stretch, 9 games it was, towards the end of the season. And he really stood out, actually. It's a Reading side that are set up quite defensively, that do defend in a low block. And there were definitely a few games I watched where the opposition, had a lot of the ball. Reading would deny space in central areas, and therefore the centre-backs were having to deal with a lot of crosses, a lot of balls into the box. And that's the sort of thing that sometimes it is said that young defenders can struggle with, just the physicality of it and even the concentration and positioning of it. And there was a game against Charlton where he was absolutely magnificent, playing against an experienced defender in Michael Morrison. McIntyre just stood out, just absolutely immaculate in the air. Really impressive for a young defender. And yeah, as I say, left-footed as well. Yet to decide just how good he is technically. It doesn't really, Reading aren't set up to give their centre-backs a lot of a remit to sort of spray passes around. But he's someone that I'm keeping an eye on just because he kind of broke out towards the back end of last season. Reading would be mad not to give him game time because of kind of what I've just said. Like, it's obviously not as easy as this, but if he is good and if he plays a full season at a good level for Reading, he will be worth 10 million quid to a Premier League club. So it's worth it for them to give him as much game time as possible. He's come through their youth system and has always been a real darling of the youth system, captain all the way up and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to him becoming a first teamer this season.
Okay, and our fullbacks, who have we got here? Well, one of them I know is popped up on Jose Mourinho's radar at Tottenham. So lead us through those. Yeah,
so the right back, Jed Spence, he plays for Middlesbrough. And, I mean, it's ridiculous, really. There's the talent coming through in this one specific right back or right wing back position is pretty obscene. He's actually the same age group as the Sessegnon twins, of Jayden Bogle at Derby, who's got 2 years under his belt. Max Aarons, of course, at Norwich, so highly sought after. Tariq Lamptey, who moved from Chelsea to Brighton and impressed in a few games towards the end of the season. Nathan Ferguson as well, who's just joined Palace from West Brom. So it's a very talented group of fullbacks as well in the same age group. He burst onto the scene, Middlesbrough under Jonathan Woodgate last year, really decided to lean on some of their younger talent. They were one of those clubs who had always spoken about having a really good academy, lots of talent coming through, but they weren't really promoting it, and they had this group of senior players that were kind of blocking a lot of pathways. And actually one of the good things that Woodgate did, while the results on the pitch were pretty disastrous, was to bring through Jed Spence and Hayden Coulson. And immediately they injected into what was quite an old team just legs, essentially. Energy and legs and speed. Coulson plays down the left and Jed Spence down the right, and at this point it's still not 100% whether they are right backs, right wing backs, or even right or left midfielders. So we're still kind of working out where they'll both finish up. But Spence just instantly just provided this team with something a bit different. He's really quick, he carries the ball really well, something of a calling card for him with just these absolute lung-bursting runs down the right wing, carrying the ball from from his own half right to the byline and delivering. Signs of perfectly good delivery from out wide as well. And yeah, he's just the sort of player that, again, depending on how Neil Warnock wants to use him this season, and there might be a bit of a myth that Warnock hates young players. It's not quite right. And I think that Jed Spence will be a key player for him. Hopefully Warnock can sort of develop his defensive instincts. I'm sure he'll make sure that he's growing his appetite for the physical side of the game, and hopefully that won't dampen what is a very exciting dribbler or ball carrier, I'd say, from right-sided areas.
Where does that Warnock thing come from? Because obviously my definitive memory of him and this is going to age me a little bit, is him bringing through Michael Brown and Phil Jagielka at Sheffield United during that season when they lost in the playoff final. Like, I know he's a little bit sort of nut and bolty with his football teams, but that seems a little bit, I don't know, he's been terribly successful for someone that's derided as much as he is.
Yeah, I think, look, it might be a more recent thing. There's just, the cult of Neil Warnock has kind of solidified more and more over the last 5 years, hasn't it? The sort of style of football that he plays, which seems fairly rudimentary and is at times very direct and focused on, second balls, which is the sort of thing that has become unfashionable, even though you literally cannot argue with his results. He came in at Rotherham and orchestrated a remarkable survival in the Championship against the odds. He then took Cardiff from just above the relegation zone up the table in his first season and then to the top of it, or second place rather, in his second season, where Cardiff were not expected to be challenging at all for the Premier League in that time. And then he came in at Borough with 8 games to go, and within, they had just dropped into the relegation zone, and with 4 games gone, it was quite clear that they'd be safe. So the results are impeccable. I would say that certainly that Cardiff squad, it was just quite an old squad. Like, there just weren't many young players getting minutes. There weren't many young players there, to be quite honest. So whether that's the talent available to him that he's not keen on, probably more likely than he just doesn't like young players. And this Middlesbrough side, they're without parachute payments now. They're having to cut costs significantly. And what that means is they are going to have to lean on some of these young players. So hopefully he can go some way to sort of dispel those myths and really develop what are a group of quite talented young players.
Okay, so on the other side of your defence, you've gone for Norwich's Sam McCallum. Are you expecting Jamal Lewis to leave? I mean, I think most of us are, but is that the presumption here?
Yeah, I think so. I put Sam McCallum down because I think he's a really interesting player, and almost having done that, now I'm a little concerned that if we revisit this in a few months, he might actually be out on loan somewhere, which wouldn't be ideal, but wouldn't be a total disaster. Because I think even if Lewis goes, they've signed a Spanish lad called Quintilla, also on loan, and I think the suggestion is that McCallum is going to be battling either Lewis and Quintilla, or potentially just Quintilla for that left back role, and maybe won't be the sort of the obvious starter, at least to begin with. But lovely segue here, because that's what they said about him last year. He started last season at Coventry, thought of as a very raw talent with a lot of athleticism and pace, and probably would get some minutes in the cup competitions, but would not be the first team's left back. They had quite a good left back called Mason, and within a few months, it just became quite clear that once they switched to 3 at the back and had so much onus on the wing-backs providing width in the final third, because they played this sort of box midfield system with 2 sitting midfielders and 2 attacking midfielders, and it really was the fullbacks, or the wing-backs rather, who had to provide the width. That's where McCallum's skill set really came into its own, because just the stamina and speed with which he got up and down the flanks. They had some midfielders who could switch play really well, and that was really effective for them. He actually became, you'd almost say one of their biggest creative threats, even though he wouldn't be considered a creative player necessarily, just because he was the one getting into really good positions down the left-hand side. So I think what's interesting about him, you get this quite a lot in the EFL, and it's pretty exciting for me. A lot of players come down from Premier League academies and come down with this pedigree, and they've been in these lush academies for their lifetime. Sam McCallum is actually a graduate of Jamie Vardy's V9 Academy. He was playing non-league football for Herne Bay. He's from the sort of Canterbury, Kent area. Had never been attached to a professional side, and when he went to Jamie Vardy's V9 Academy about 2 years ago now, one of the recruitment guys from Coventry saw him and decided that he had the tools to mould into a modern attacking wing back, and that's exactly what they've done. Coventry, 20 games he played, essentially 25 games maybe, £3.5 million to Norwich City. It's testament to his development over the last few years, and there's plenty to suggest that if you haven't had that sort of formal education in an academy system, well, does that mean you've got an even higher ceiling? Does that mean you've got unbelievable amounts of untapped potential? Certainly in the case of Jamie Vardy, it did seem that way. So hopefully Sam McCallum is in the right spot here with Norwich, who I think you can trust Norwich to to do right by him, whether that is making him a first-team player or finding him the right sort of pathway, loan minutes or something like that. I'm just excited to see what happens to him over the next few years.
Ali, I'm going to ask you to rattle through your 4 midfield players. We've got 2 central, 2 attacking midfielders. Go, discuss.
Yeah, Lewis Travis at Blackburn is a player that I'm excited about. Just not the sort of player that we've seen sort of developing in the Championship in recent seasons. For the most part, we've seen, as I've discussed already, young fullbacks doing well and getting Premier League moves, young centre-backs as well, or attacking players with pace and skill. Travis is a sort of ball-winning number 6, you'd say, but he's got the sort of skill set where he can play multiple different roles in the centre of midfield, and I think that's quite a valuable thing for any manager to have, because it means you can use different players and different systems, and you can rely on Travis to sort of thrive pretty much in any formation, any system that you'd want to play, because he wins the ball. He's got a real thirst for the defensive side of the game, for the midfield battle, and he wins his duels at a very high percentage. He makes tackles and interceptions. He's got a real nice, I think on this pod you're allowed to say words like this, he's got a real nice sort of shithouse vibe to him, where he draws a lot of fouls, wins a lot of free kicks in the midfield area to release pressure on his team, even at times where you might think he wasn't actually fouled. And on the ball is probably where he has the most improvement to make if he's to be a Premier League sensible transfer in the near future. He's by no means poor on the ball, but I would describe him as tidy rather than creative. He definitely knows how to keep possession and makes pretty good decisions in possession, rarely puts his team at risk, but I wouldn't say he's hugely creative. And he hasn't yet shown much of a goal threat in terms of, getting into the opposition area and finishing. But that's probably down more to his role than any huge deficiencies that he has. So, look, I just wanted a spot in my team for a hard-working midfield player who I think is impressed over the last 2 seasons, established himself as Blackburn's one of their key players, and he's only 22. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens to him over the next few seasons as well. Then Callum Styles of Barnsley is a bit of a wild card here, because he wasn't playing for Barnsley basically at all until the last few games of the season. They had that miraculous survival, did they not? And Styles was at the heart of that. He's a very small, left-footed player who I think is a central midfield player ultimately, but has played left wing back for them. They've got a really interesting manager, Gerhard Struber, who takes a sort of Bielsa approach in not really caring what players' natural positions are, but actually fitting them into all and any positions across the pitch. Styles is just one to watch. Looks really tidy. As I said, he is small, but he's sort of a real bustling midfield player and just tons of quality on that left peg. So he really impressed for Barnsley in their last few games of the season, and I think he'll be a key player for them this year.
Okay, moving forward, you've gone for Domingos Quina, who I remember a couple of years ago when a lot of Watford fans spoke really positively about him, and yet he's never really made any kind of convincing impression in the Premier League. What's the thinking here?
Well, the thinking is not necessarily based on what I know or think about him, but rather on Twitter the other day on the Not the Top 20 account, just asking people on Twitter which young player at their club they think will sort of make the leap this season and start getting a lot more minutes and hopefully develop into a key player. And we got about 10 responses from Watford fans. They all said Quina. So he's obviously someone that the fans really want to see.
Yeah.
It feels like every now and again you get a situation where a club's relegation can be very good for a young player who is existing at that club, who probably wouldn't be risked in the Premier League but might get a bit more game time. So I'm hoping to see this kid who is 20 years old. He's played for all the Portuguese youth teams who have been so successful as a key creative part of those teams. So there must be a lot of talent in there. He has scored some spectacular goals in his limited appearances for Watford so far. And I just hope that when the dust settles on what is going to be a ridiculously busy 6 weeks for Watford and their recruitment team, we end up with Quina sort of playing in the hole or as an advanced 8 in a Watford side who hopefully will have relaxed a bit and calmed down a bit and can challenge at the top end of the division.
Yeah, it'd be interesting because I remember when he left West Ham, he was one of the players used to whip their ability to denigrate their ability to bring through developing players. He was a kind of a black mark against their academy pipeline. So that'd be really interesting. Your forward line, there's going to be some familiar faces in here, but can we start with one I don't recognise? Brentford's Halil Difasoglu. Talk to me about him.
Yeah, so just quickly, we've missed out Ilias Chair, who's QPR. He's the kind of anointed one to replace the output of Eze. and he is a small attacking midfield player with an absolutely unbelievable long shot. He burst onto the scene a bit like Eze, that loan spell at Wickham. Chair was on loan at Stevenage, not this most recent season, but the one before, and he scored like 7 goals from about 30 yards. So we really like his ability to test the keeper from range, and he's sort of trying to develop into more of a creative number 10 as well. They're going to lean on him really heavily. QPR are going all in on some of their own academy players, and Chair is one of them. He grew up playing cage football in Belgium, where he was from, and you can really see that in his style of play. So just because he's so small but has such a powerful shot, I just really wanted to flag him up because I think he will be at least on the goal of the season contenders, if not a player that makes the leap. And then, Dervisoglu of Brentford. I'm not an expert in Dutch football, but he came over to Brentford from Dutch football. And what happens often with Brentford is fans of, let's say, French football, if they're signing someone like Benrahma, or fans of, or Mbermo, shall I say, as well, who's part of the France under-21 team, or someone like Dervisoglu, there's sometimes a bit of confusion from abroad as to why Brentford are able to sign these players. But the pathway is very clear now, and it's not hard for potential signings to take a look at some of the players that Brentford have signed, that they've developed, that they've given opportunities to, and have been a launch pad for bigger moves elsewhere. So Dervisoglu is kind of the one who I think might step up if and when Ollie Watkins moves. Their succession planning, Brentford, is what stands out, among other things about them, the fact that they always seem to have someone already in the building when they sell a player for big money. So it's less about Dervisoglu himself, to be honest, than about the fact that if Brentford have signed him, and if he's had 6 months to get up to speed with things, he's probably going to be really good. And we'll probably talk about him next summer having scored 20 goals and probably linked with a move to the Premier League.
How many players do you reckon Brentford are going to lose this summer? It did feel as if it was kind of... I mean, they're built to exist in cycles, obviously, for very good reason. Ollie Watkins, as we've been speaking, has actually been christened Championship Player of the Year, which is good for him. How much of a rebuild are they actually going to have to do over the next few weeks?
Not as much as... I think they're favourites for the title. And if you look at someone like Watford and Bournemouth, clearly they've got more to do because they'll have more players leaving. But it is the significance of the guys leaving Brentford. I'm almost positive, and there's no inside info here, and I can't tell you where they're going, but I'm pretty confident that Benrahma will leave. Last summer, he was tipped to leave, and I think wanted to leave and was eventually persuaded to stay, which is obviously a good decision, but it did mean that he didn't really play for the first 6 weeks of last season because he was a bit grumpy. And Ollie Watkins as well, I think he gave Brentford, sort of promised them that one more season and then will leave with their blessing. So clearly they've got, about 45 goals to replace there, with players like Dervisoglu having to come in and step up. From what we've seen of the guys already at the club, people like Tarek Fosu and Dervisoglu, Marcus Force, who's a young player, striker, you can't say with confidence that they will, match the level of Benrahma and Watkins. That seems unlikely, doesn't it? But you do just still believe in the whole system, and you believe that they will probably have a couple of transfers lined up for when they get those big transfer fees. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to lose 2 sensational players for the level, put it that way, and that can be quite damaging. I wouldn't be surprised if Bees have a similar poor start and then get stronger towards the end of the season.
Troy Parrott's on your list. He's gone on loan to Millwall, and that's a really interesting one because obviously he's following the sort of the lineage of Harry Kane going out on loan down to the New Den. It's interesting because I've seen a bit of him in both Tottenham's under 23 games, but also he got a few appearances in Pochettino's last pre-season. Very complete forward. Also, he's a very developed forward for a teenager. Like physically, he is already a man. How do you reckon he's going to do in the Championship?
Well, I hope he does well. That there was a lot of talk, or there's always a lot of talk, about how you mustn't expect too much from players making their first loan, just because it's so often it takes them out of a comfort zone. They are very young adults, sometimes not even technically adults, and all that comes with that off the field can sometimes impact performance on the field. And even if you might be considered a wonder kid on Football Manager, sometimes that first loan can be quite tough. The problem is that when Tammy Abraham went to Bristol City and scored 20-odd goals on his first loan, and Rhian Brewster went to Swansea in January last year and was absolutely magnificent and would have scored 20 goals had he been there for the whole season, all of a sudden you're starting to see a crop of young players who didn't need much time to adapt. So I think it just seems to work out for everyone involved here. There's a lot of good feeling about Millwall at the moment. They were very good second half of last season. They've got a very settled squad, which is sort of evolving a little bit to become a bit less direct under Gary Rowett and try and become a bit a side that creates more chances, because that's one of the things that really holds them back. I don't think, unlike Tammy at Bristol City and Brewster at Swansea, that Parrott is going to get a lot of chances put on a plate for him. So he's going to have to work really hard sometimes to create chances for himself. I'm not necessarily expecting 20 goals from him, but I would like to see, as you've said, this sort of complete forward that he is tipped as being, playing for a team that will give him some opportunities and who might well be something of a dark horse in this year's championship. So that's more of I'm just interested to see him play. And then, a couple of other ones. I just can't wait to see if Dom Solanke has found his shooting boots, because I think if he has, he could be a pretty impressive goal scorer if Bournemouth can sort of deal with the relegation hangover. And then I just wanted to shout out a player who has played a bit last season, Tyrese Campbell, who plays for Stoke, son of Kevin Campbell. Stoke have got about 8 different strikers, so the pathway for him has been quite difficult. But he is such a slick finisher. It's like if you just watch the goals that he scores, you'll be left thinking that this guy is just a bit of a gun when it comes to finishing, and I really want to see him get more opportunities, because I think he reminds me a bit of Jared Bowen, the power with which he shoots and the way that he always seems to find the corners. I think maybe his all-round game isn't as developed, and you've got people like Sam Vokes who you kind of know what you're going to get if you're Michael O'Neill, but hopefully Campbell will get some more minutes this season and continue what is quite an impressive sort of minutes per goal ratio that he has so far in his career.
Solanke is the one that absolutely fascinates me. If you watch him live, he feels like the kind of player that's done really badly by the way football values statistics, because there is quite obviously a very capable footballer there. It just feels as if he's not at Bournemouth in the system that Bournemouth used towards the end of their time in the Premier League. It wasn't quite built around what he did well.
For sure.
So it's really interesting to see if he can. Sometimes when a player drops down a level, and finds a little bit more of an equilibrium. He's going to be playing under a new manager, of course. It'd be really interesting to see how he adjusts, because he was the one in that age group. If you go back a couple of years to his time at Chelsea, he was the one that everyone spoke about. So it'd be really interesting to see how he does.
Completely agree. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's with young players and with people who have had that sort of career path that Solanke's had, which has taken him to Chelsea and Liverpool, and then kind of a big money move as well to Bournemouth. Like the way that you're judged and the pressures put on you are probably not that fair at times. And he's such a young player, and you know, those guys who come through with such pedigree from the youth ranks, it does not always translate into a top level Premier League career. That does not mean that they can't be very, very good pros and very good goal scorers. And you know, the way in which Solanke just absolutely destroyed youth football makes me very confident that in the right situation he can sort of bounce back and move towards the top of the footballing pyramid once more after a brief stint in the second tier, hopefully.
I wonder whether actually he was a victim of what happened at Chelsea, because it was as if the world made their mind up about what kind of person he was, because 100%. All the stories leaked out about the contract. He went to Liverpool. The narrative around him was sort of a young player that had got a little bit ahead of himself, and so as and when it didn't quite go to plan at Liverpool and then Bournemouth, everyone was extremely harsh. I felt like a lot of people were very harsh without actually watching him play live.
I think that's right, and I think people make judgments on young players' personalities at a time where they are still developing as adults. And as with everything else, not to get on my soapbox, but you just get extremes as always. You get this bloke's not a good bloke, or you get this bloke's an unbelievable professional who's so determined to get to the top. And we all know the sorts of the sorts of biases and subconscious or otherwise that people have, and Solanke's been something of a victim of that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him flourish.
Okay, so Joe has asked me to wrap up, which could go quite badly. I'm going to do my finest Joe Devine impression. First of all, I'm going to thank you, Ali and Maxwell, for coming on.
Hey, thank you guys. I love coming on. So any and all invites are welcome.
we'll have you back very, very soon so that people can revisit the predictions. Thank you very much, Ali.
Thank you, guys.